So this morning, we wanted to talk about culture, and uh, I've worked with many different organizations around the planet. And when I woke this morning, Dave, I had this thought in my head about the times I had, been a CEO or a president and or was leading a post-acquisition integration and thought, well, I know better. I've been around. Um, and just start jumping right in the way I do, start working, and really probably didn't honor the culture. Um, and when I think back, I think, well, I might have done a pretty good job. And then there's other times I think, oh, I didn't think I did a very good job at all honoring the culture. When you hear me say that, what's your response? What do you start thinking about immediately?
Well, I guess I start thinking about the fact that people have been living in an environment that you're not living in, and they know a lot about it. In many cases, they're comfortable with it, and sometimes they're not comfortable with it. But it gets me to think about why people react the way they do. And a lot of it in the organization is that, especially if you're buying them, and assume you're buying a successful firm, in other words, one that's not a turnaround situation, they're thinking, we're proud of our culture. This is who we are. We have gotten here with this culture, and that's what's made us successful. And then somebody comes in, like maybe Attila the Hun, and I'm not accusing you, Bill, of being Attila the Hun, but thinks that they know better about how to run that organization than the people who are already there do. So, humans are strange creatures. And I think one of the things that's important is that we all crave respect. And I think a lot of when people attack culture or want to deal with it, they're not catching that part of it. All they're doing is saying, well, we don't like the way people are behaving because it doesn't fit our model. But we never think about why they're behaving that way and the fact that they may be very proud of what they're doing.
Yeah, I definitely have run into that, many times, not just in the M&A kind of scenario. Clearly, for about 10 years, I was in that groove where we do our analysis and strategic rationale, and it all made sense financially. And yeah, once we got into it, one of the things when I was leading post-acquisition integrations is the question I got probably the most was, why are we making all these changes so quickly? Because and I was in companies that were acquired, but the changes for me were welcomed. Yet, I have the sense that the changes that I was in charge of leading may not have been as welcome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's many reasons why they may not be welcome. And let's not, just hone in that culture is the only thing. What's also going on in these things is people are worrying about what's going to happen to me. Do I have a job? What's it going to look like? Who is this person? Are they just headhunting here? Uh, are they interested in retaining the talent or what? Is it an invasion or is it, a merger or, is it going to be collaborative? All these things are going on in people's heads. They have bills to pay. They have invested time in their careers. And maybe in some cases, they're just really pleased with the way things are going. And I have a lot of examples I could talk about that. If you'd like, I can take you through a few of them, which have been really kind of interesting.
Yeah, it might be good to just chat through an example that in some of the implications of a new leadership team coming in or a new owner coming in and wanting to make a lot of changes without really understanding what's going on behind the curtain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, when you come in as a new leader, let's be honest. First of all, what's the conditions under which you're coming in? Are you following a leader who's been very successful in the organization and maybe is stepping down to retire or whatnot? as the company faced problems, and now all of a sudden this new unknown is coming in to turn things around. So there's a lot of uncertainty about a leader. And let's be honest, Bill, you don't get to be a leader unless you've been successful most of the time. And usually it's very easy that we can become, I don't want to say full of ourselves, but thinking we know all the answers. I'm a data-driven person, and we know that Odaptix is data-driven. You and I have had this long conversation. If I'm coming in, the first thing I want to do is get a good lay of the land, whether it's to do an acquisition or it's coming in as a new leader to run the organization. And what do? The most important thing is, how do we get information so we better understand the context that we're walking into? And in particular, in this case, what is the culture? So I think step one is really important, to not assume anything about the organization that you've just bought, especially the people. And to your point, you probably looked over the product lines, you probably looked over the strategic issues, you've looked over the financials, and everything on paper may look good, or here and there are things that you want to change, but you still don't have a whole lot of data on the people themselves and how they're going to react to everything that you want to bring forward. So I think that's a critical thing. A lot of leaders come in like bulls and just run over the place. That's not a good idea in my experience.
Yeah. Thinking back on my last CEO role, there was a lot of things in the culture I liked. For example, their commitment to the customer, their flexibility in meeting a customer need around a product design or a delivery. And then there was other aspects that didn't meet expectation, and I fear or feel that I could have done a better job honoring their history before making changes, in just reflection. And I can certainly state openly that if I had to do it again, I would have wanted some more data around the culture, the history, to honor it more properly. I would frame it that way. What do you think of that kind of a practice, or a way to approach it as a new leader, a new owner?
Well, again, I have to understand the context I'm walking into. So am I walking into a firm that's been failing, and I'm a turnaround person, or am I walking into a firm that's been successful? And yeah, everybody's got glitches in their organization. There's always something that needs to be fixed. The question is how fast I need to take it on. And
Yeah.
second, how important are the people that I'm dealing with here? Do I need to retain these people? Am I counting on them to drive the business? Is this going to be a consolidation, or am I picking up, say, a geographic expansion where I'm dependent upon the leadership team? So if I really want to keep these people, I sure as heck better respect them and acknowledge them for the successes they've had. And that culture in particular is the reason behind it in many cases. But if there are things that need to be changed, I need to engage these people in this process, and I need to understand their perspective on things. And if I see that there are things coming down in the marketplace or the external environment that are going to require that we make these necessary changes, then I think as a good senior executive, it's incumbent upon me to frame those issues. And rather than saying we don't like your culture, we come in there and say, look, we're moving into a new world. Here's what's happening. If we're going to be successful, how do we respect what you've done to get you where we are today? Now, what do we need to do different together to be successful moving into the future? And this is the kind of impact it'll have on all of us.
Yeah,
That's usually what I think is important in that situation.
Most of the experiences I've had, it's interesting having this conversation. What's coming up? It's one, our focus and commitment was to grow the business we had acquired, or continue the growth and success of the business that I was leading. No doubt in my mind. But as we have this conversation, I'm starting to think about the new ownership scenario in M&A, where it's us and our thinking and the new organization and their thinking. And we're not in the same pool of water yet. swimming together, so to speak. And I think that for me was could have been or might have been a hindrance to the success of the overall program,
Yeah.
because I have my thinking or our team's thinking as new owners versus the decades long habits and thinking patterns that the organization has had up to that point in time.
Yeah. Well, again, it's going to boil down to, again, if you're buying a successful company and you want to use them as a platform for growth and expansion, then my immediate thought is that the people that are there, we need to retain them. We can't have people jumping ship, but especially people who hold critical knowledge, insights, maybe behind technology. And if it's a service-based business, all those assets are easily able to walk out the door. I work with a large engineering company in the US that was going to make an acquisition of a 200-person engineering firm in England. And the large company right away thought it had the answers. It was buying an entrepreneurial firm. And they came in and they said, well, you're going to have to follow through on our capital budgeting process, whether you like it or not. They didn't use those words. And they started dictating all of the processes that they were going to have to now belong to. And by the time that happened, they never got the deal done because they ran off literally all of the key people in the firm who liked the entrepreneurial firm, were there for that reason. They didn't want to work for a large corporation. So, they had a tough decision, the sellers, do we collect our money and the whole thing dissipates? But for the buying organization, are you ready to pay that kind of money and watch your assets walk out the door? So I think what happens is that we need to get the data on our culture and the other organization's culture and look at where we're similar and say, okay, we don't have an issue here unless we're both similar on a dimension that we both feel that we need to change. Now you got unified perspective, but we need to do something differently. But where we're going to change them, and we have in a way that where we have a big clash, we're going to have to figure out how to work through that. Now, some executives think, okay, we bought them. Too bad we don't have the time to think through that one, and that's great. And we're just going to impose our culture, and that's it. And they're going to either get along or they're not going to be there. Fine, if you're getting assets, we can live with that. If you want people, I think you're going to have a rough sledding, and you'll wind up losing all the value. It's going to walk out the door that you thought you were going to get in the first place, and that hits the financial projections hard when that happens.
Yeah, it makes me think of the years we were endeavoring to make acquisitions and competing with General Electric, and they had a certain strict methodology. Once they bought a business, it became a GE business, and it basically, in our eyes, transformed to a GE business overnight. And that must have been really challenging for the businesses being acquired, because they appeared, again, I wasn't inside the business to know, but from the external part, they everything changed, very, very quickly. And I find it interesting, but don't know if it's, useful in the world we live in today. I think that's the other thing. It's easy for me to look in the rearview mirror about the way I behaved or the way I handled certain situations. But in today's world, it seems a bit more complex with a lot more variables to manage.
You make a good point, because right now, as we're having this conversation, we know we're in a war for talent. Okay, that's going on across businesses all over the place. If we're in a war for talent, retention of the talent we have is critical. So if you've got a successful business with highly talented people, and you're going to just kind of roll them over and insert your culture, especially now with the technology where people are working remotely, I'm not sure they're going to put up with it. Millennials, Gen Zers, I'm not sure they're going to put up with it. They'll go find a place where they fit, or better yet, they're just going to say, the heck with it, I'll go start up my own company. And they're doing it and changing their lifestyles as a result. So we can't be so gruff in this anymore. We have to take into consideration how the other people think, feel, behave, and how we're going to get the best out of those people after we do all of this integration. Are we going to keep them, and are we going to get them motivated to perform? And I've seen people walk out, people that you don't want to walk out.
Yeah. We bought a lot of companies that had staffs full of engineers, and the engineer personality, in my experience, was they'd rather not just deal with it, and they would just resign the first week, not knowing really yet what was coming, whether it would be better or worse. They just didn't want to deal with it. And that was, now 10, 15 years ago. But I think you bring up an excellent point around the modern workforce and what people are willing to put up with before moving on. So this notion of honoring the culture, honoring the workforce is really, it sounds more paramount now than it's ever been, Dave.
I think so. I really think so. And I can tell you from when I started doing this kind of work in the 1980s, where it was all about deal making and thinking about humans, thinking about integration and culture, were almost non-existent in many cases. And we've come a long way. Companies and executives have become a lot more thoughtful about those issues. But today, especially with the generations the way they are, and the nature of us moving heavily into a service-based economy where people are really pivotal in this, especially in areas where you can't automate what people do, retention is the game. And not only retention, but how do you keep people, motivated and super pumped and committed to the organization and willing to go beyond the call of duty to do something to help the organization. If people feel deflated, not respected, and the term in acquisition feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens where their opinions don't matter, their way of life and how they do things don't matter, they're just going to bolt. It's just a matter of when the opportunity arises for them to bolt. They may not be able to go out the door immediately because they don't have something, but as soon as they do, they're looking around. Darn well they're looking around, and I don't blame them.
All right, so very interesting, really good points, Dave. Last question, put you on the spot here.
Sure.
What advice would you have to a new leader coming into a new organization that needs some help or needs some change management projects? What would your advice to that leader be?
The first one is a wise statement given to me by a wise sage. It's not enough to be right. That's where I would start, to have enough humility to realize it's not enough to be right, because people will resist in many cases if you don't pay them respect or they have great fear about how this is going to impact them. So I would say step one is, if you can, in due diligence, which it's not always easy to do, get as much information as you can about the organization, the culture, and the people. But at a minimum, even if you buy them, you've got sufficient evidence that it will work. Start an engagement process with the other organization, understand how they operate, what their culture is, and then plot out what is the best way to deal with this. What timeframes do we want to operate in making these changes? There's a couple of different philosophies on that we don't have time to get into today, but I would say stop, think, and to quote another executive who I think realized the value of this, ready, fire, aim is not a good thing. There'll be collateral damage, I guarantee you, unintended, if you use that philosophy.
All right.
Get the data.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. And stay tuned for our next conversation with Dave coming up next week. Thanks.
Thank